How old were you at the time of the voyage in 1982?
I was 26 years old when the Yumcombe sailed.
Okay. What were you doing before you became a crew member?
I had just returned from a 2-year stint in the Peace Corps, and was before I joined the Yumcombe's crew, and I was going to law school at the University of Minnesota Law School at the time of the voyage.
Okay. Are you originally from that area down in around Hastings, or where were you living at the time?
I grew up in the Twin Cities, and I was a graduate of Mounds View High School, and I had gone off to various cities during my college time, but had settled back in the Twin Cities before the Yumcombes came about.
How did you hear about the Yumcombe?
I first saw the Yumcombe ship at the Minneapolis Institute of Arts, and I think that was in 79 or 80, somewhere in that range. And I saw that the ship was on display outside the museum during the Vikings exhibit that they had at the museum, and so that was my first exposure. And it was talking on there that information on the ship that it was planning on sailing to Norway, and that certainly piqued my interest.
Well, why were you interested in joining in the crew? Were you a sailor or just the adventure?
Well, as I mentioned, I had been in the Peace Corps, and I was out in the West Pacific in these little Micronesian islands, and we sailed island to island in outrigger canoes, and so I'd spent a couple of years doing a lot of sailing, ocean sailing, and learning traditional navigation and stuff. So the thought of sailing the Viking ship, with me being a Norwegian guy, was very appealing.
How did you get selected to be one of the crew members?
Well, the crew was selected in the summer before we sailed, and I had gone up in the winter before the training sessions began, and put a little note in a plastic bag and put a rock in it, and I threw it on the deck of the boat up at Knife River, Minnesota, and told them that I would be interested in, whoever was going to read this, that I was interested in joining the crew. And fortunately, one of the asked, Tom, came across this thing, and he called me up and said, "Do you want to come and try out?" And I said, "Of course." So I spent the year sailing Lake Superior, and at the end of the summer, I was chosen to be one of the crew.
I understand that you were the medical officer. Why was that position a fit for you?
I was the medical officer on board the Yumcombes because the guy who was set up to take that job jumped off the boat in New York and did not sail across the ocean. And we scrambled to try to figure out who should take on that responsibility. And having been I was in the Peace Corps, and they give you a lot of medical equipment and other stuff, because I was out living on my own on this little island out in the middle of nowhere in the Pacific Ocean. I had to study up on a whole bunch of medical stuff and how to handle cuts and breaks and all kinds of stuff. So after some conversation, I guess I was deemed to have the most background in that and interest in that area, and so I was picked after Lynn left the ship.
Okay. As a medical officer, what are some of your strongest memories?
Well, actually, I was very, very fortunate as medical officer of the Yumcombes that I really didn't have to do much of anything. I was very afraid of people. I mean, we were pulling lines and using pulleys and stuff. I mean, people could easily have ripped fingers off, and all kinds of things could have happened, not to mention cuts and bruises and breaks. But in the end, the only real medical event was while swimming out in the ocean on a very calm day north of Scotland. One of our crew members, Vegard, had gotten into a Portuguese man-o-war and had stings on his shoulder and back. And the solution for that is vinegar, and it's just applied it to him, and that kind of mellowed that out. But that became, fortunately for me, the biggest calamity of the entire trip, which I still have a hard time believing that nobody got hurt.
Oh, you had a fire on board. Was that something that you had to take care of?
Well, that was in New York City, and that's just about the time when we were figuring out how this whole thing was going to shake out. And Roger got burned a little bit, but he actually went into a clinic and got seen by a doctor. So that was before my stint.
Okay. Were there any scary or frightening situations that you encountered during the voyage?
Well, I would say as far as the most harrowing experience during the ship's trip across the Atlantic, I'm sure that the conversations about the storms that hit have come up, and they were significant. And I guess my own personal experience that was kind of scariest was we were in the process of dropping the sail down during a very strong gust of wind, and we really were struggling to get the sail down, and we were heeling really hard. I don't know if the winds must have been 50, 60 miles an hour, I'm not sure. And the whole crew was trying to pull the sail down, and as the yard came down, it formed the sail was billowing forward. The square sail was billowing forward in such a way that the wind was still catching in the sail, even though the sail was most of the way down. And I thought that if we broke the open column that was allowing the wind to catch the sail, it would stop that. And so I jumped over the yard arm and tried to bring the sail into the boat. But, of course, the wind was pushing so hard, I almost got thrown right out of the boat and landed down, fortunately, on the deck and helped bring it down. But I could have easily gone overboard, and that was a silly thing to do, but that was, I guess, my scariest moment.
Did you have any, besides the sail, any power? Did you have a motor of any kind?
No. Our boat was sail-powered. I mean, we had a little 9-horse something that we could, outboard that we could use around in the harbor to just kind of back into places and stuff if it was incredibly calm. But other than that, we used oars.
If you had gone overboard, what was the plan to rescue people?
Well, the crew had done some training on overboard, man overboard training, but in really hard conditions, basically you would just be lost.
That would be scary. What do you think was the most important decision that was made by Eric Rudstrom, who was the captain?
Well, Eric's biggest decision that he made on the ship was after we went through that storm and the garboard on the ship cracked and we were taking on lots of water and we had gotten pretty beat up. And some of the crew were feeling like, we were only a couple hundred miles from Labrador. Maybe we should go in and, kind of get fixed up and stuff. And Eric just said, no, we're going to Norway. So we all just had to buckle down and do our work and, stuff tar into the crack and make sure that everything was held together, and we just kept sailing. So that was really his drive to make the trip successful.
When that happened, did the crew, I mean, it sounded like they kind of fell in line. Didn't anybody stage a mutiny, or you just did what you were urged to do?
Well, when Eric decided that we should just continue the trip, a number of the crew members just expressed doubts about the shape of the ship and things, but none of us had been through this kind of thing before. He'd done ocean crossings, and he just said, no, this ship is sound. This crack can be dealt with, and we can fix everything. So we need to just keep going. And he was confident enough in his decision that everybody just accepted that and went with it.
Okay, so it was based on his experience on the ocean, then.
Eric's experience was admired by all the crew, so we all appreciated his word on sailing matters.
Okay. What have you been doing the past 36 years after the Yumkunst?
36, isn't that awful?
Yeah, it's crazy.
Well, as I said, when I went on the Yumkunst trip, I had taken a leave of absence from the Minnesota law school. And so I came back and I finished law school and was admitted to practice, and I was a practicing attorney, and I guess I still am. And I worked primarily in corporate matters, and for the last 25 years, I joined my family had a business operation, and I handled the legal work and financial work for the company for 25 years, and last year I retired.
And now you're living on a ranch? Is that what I heard you say?
Well, I live on a small, it's not a big ranch. We have 25 acres down by Hastings, Minnesota, and we have a couple horses, and we ride quite a bit. I also have a place in just outside of Red Lodge, Montana, and we spend much of our summer out there. We bring the horses out and ride in the mountains. And I do a lot of fly fishing and hunting, and I'm also finished my master's degree in military history, and I'm currently working on a book based on my thesis, which was about a group of Apache Indians who were awarded the Medal of Honor back in the 1870s, and I'm hope to finish that book this year.
That sounds interesting. What life lessons that you learned from the voyage do you still use?
Well, I have to say that being at sea for over a month, it does kind of make you think one thing, how small you are, and yet how much you can do if you just keep at it and you have good people around you. And I think I've used in my life, in my business life, I've worked a lot towards developing good teamwork and an appreciation for getting hard things done, and certainly thinking that anything that seems obtainable can be done. Okay.
Do you still sail?
Yes, I still sail. I have a sailboat in my barn here, and we get out, not as much as I used to. My wife and I, we do charter boats in various places around the world, and go out for a week or two at a time. We've had the good fortune to sail in French Polynesia and the Windward Islands down in the Caribbean, and Belize and Croatia, and so I've been fortunate to be able to keep it up over the years.
Have you ever gone back to the island where you were when you were in the Peace Corps?
I have never been back to the islands I was at in the Peace Corps. I still think about it. The islands are the island group of Truk in the Federated States of Micronesia. We almost went about 15 years ago and just didn't quite get there, but I'm still young, so we'll see how things shake out.